In the news this week, the brutal death of 15-year-old Cassius Turvey sparks outrage in the community, and a leading Indigenous activist calls for the Premier to visit the boy's grieving family. A WA News exclusive.
Also tonight, the hospital death mix-up at Sir Charles Gardiner Hospital continues, with the family set to launch an official complaint. Why Western Australians will be forced to pay for Eastern State power price hikes indirectly, and later, Dr Andrew Miller's comment.
This is The Evening News with Ivan Loom and Maliva Thorne.
Good evening. The brutal death of Cassius Turvey has sparked calls for the Premier to visit the boy's grief-stricken family. Cassius was allegedly murdered on the 13th of October in Middle Swan. A 21-year-old has been charged over Cassius' death, and police are continuing to investigate. Nalamaya's CEO and Indigenous activist Mervyn Eads says Premier Mark McGowan should visit the family of Cassius, just as he did when Cleo Smith was found late last year.
Oh, of course, you know, the Premier needs to come down to the ground and speak to the family, similar to what he did when the young girl Chloe went missing up north there. You know, this is an Indigenous child, and he needs to show the same respect to the family of young Cassius in the same manner he did with young Chloe's family. When they lost young Chloe, you know, when she went missing up north there, it was massive, and you know, what you do for non-Indigenous people, the Premier should also do for our Indigenous people and support our Indigenous families in such a cases.
Mr Eads also talked to WA News about what the upcoming public vigil means to the local community.
Yeah, so the vigil will be to remember the life of young Cassius, a beautiful young man that you know, a lot of people loved, and his losses have you know, impacted on our community in a massive way, and you know, the family's called for a vigil, his mum, and we will all be attending and, you know, showing our love and respect for young Cassius, and also for the family, and, you know, come together as a community and, you know, support the family in this time of grief and loss, and, you know, to remember young Cassius.
The vigil will be held in Midland at 5:30 p.m. on Monday, the 31st of October, and is open to the public. WA News will bring you the vigil live from our page.
There are new developments in the hospital death mix-up story at Sir Charles Gardiner Hospital, with the family set to launch an official complaint to the Health Department and Health Minister Amber Jade Sanderson. It comes after a doctor at Sir Charles Gardiner allegedly contacted the wrong person over a patient's passing. Family spokesman Suresh Rajan joined us exclusively this week. Suresh, thanks for your time. Are you able to provide us with an update as to what's happened since last week's broadcast?
Yeah, certainly can. Just recap and tell you a little bit about the story that happened last week. A friend of mine was contacted by the hospital to indicate that her father had died, and in the conversation soon thereafter, the doctor then handed the phone over to the nurse and said they actually had made a mistake and they got the wrong person. Now, just to give you an update, I followed up what the doctor had suggested, which was to contact the patient liaison officer at Sir Charles Gardiner Hospital. I did that, and she was completely and utterly unhelpful. She went out of her way to talk about the issues related to the client confidentiality, and we had covered that by getting a letter from the family, the daughter, who is the friend of mine, and the daughter has an enduring power of attorney for her father, so she had all the rights to get that information, and she had then appointed me to receive that information and have that conversation. The patient liaison officer, on the other hand, felt that she wasn't sure what was happening there. She was going to have to get advice. But essentially what she was saying was that I'm unable to come back to you with any information in respect of this matter until such time as you've lodged a formal complaint, which I find quite staggering, and she wanted that formal complaint to be from the father of my friend, you know, which is, when you consider that the person is elderly they're in their late 70s, and you're asking them to go through the process, a bureaucratic process. And I emphasize that point to the patient liaison officer. I find it quite incredible that you're making this a bureaucratic approach when all we're trying to do is to ascertain exactly what transpired on the day and why it was that information was provided to her that her father had died, when in actual fact he was perfectly alive. And we would hope, obviously, that this is not going to happen to anyone else, because it could jeopardize the mental health of the person receiving that news, as it did for my friend.
So, what's the next step from here for the family involved?
Look, it's very hard to actually determine that until such time as the patient liaison officer has done a full investigation of exactly what transpired. Some reason, I can't think of any, but there may be some reason why the doctor has gone so quickly to advise the daughter of the patient that her father died, but we don't know. So until such time as an investigation is conducted, and that is really what we're trying to do, to ascertain what is it that led to, one, the information that her father had died, two, the fact that they'd missed a number of medications over the time that he was there. And when you consider that these are medications for the treatment of epilepsy and seizures, it's a very, very important thing that those be adhered to in time. So we need to understand exactly what has happened.
Both Premier McGowan and ANFWA Secretary Jeanette Rea also commented on the matter. Let's take a look.
I think you'll find that incidences will crop up where people are under pressure with big workloads and working extra time and double shifts. So, mistakes are more likely to be made.
Premier, just very briefly about the health system. I understand you don't know much about it, as I asked yesterday, but is it true that, given that public hospital doctors, as we reported, has made some mistakes in contacting the wrong family, is it true that it shows that a health system is really at a stress to the point that mistakes can easily happen?
I don't know anything about the incident you're referring to, but I'll just say this. My experience of our public hospital system is it's one of the best, if not the best in the world, and it continues to be so.
What's your response to these comments?
Look, I think there's undoubtedly the case that more mistakes like this will happen. The reality is that these all appear to be based around the fact that people are stretched to the maximum level as employees of the health system. We know in the Aishwarya case, they were indicating, the nurses were indicating in the inquest that they were doing the jobs of 3 and 4 people, and that hasn't changed. And until that changes, until we get to a better staffing levels, which is exactly what the Nurses Federation is talking about, they want to see staff-patient ratios set in place, and that, I think, is missing at the moment, and that's what's causing all of these mistakes to occur. And these will continue to occur until such time as the government is prepared to invest more money in attracting more people into the system.
Suresh, thank you for the update.
Thank you.
WA Police have announced its move to build a safer nightlife, increasing Northbridge foot traffic without cars in certain areas. The move to close down James Street between William and Lake Street happened this weekend around 4 p.m. until 5 a.m. on Friday and Saturday. Over the next month, the shutdown will be from 5 p.m. onwards. Police Minister Paul Papalia says entertainment will be provided early on in the evening by the City of Perth, with a $100,000 grant provided by the state. The City of Perth intends to fund designated security ranks, where taxis and rideshare companies can drop off and pick up.
A meeting was held at Fiona Stanley Hospital earlier this week as the Australian Nursing Federation hosted an enterprise bargaining agreement update. The discussion included the next stage of industrial action, with the union wanting to discover the true figures of staff deficits in WA hospitals. The government, on the other hand, claims the wage offer is more generous than other states and urged health workers to take up the offer.
So the point of the industrial action so far is to bring out into the light the amount of staff deficits the government's been hiding by getting staff to report the deficits on the wards on each shift. For the longest time, we've had the staff doing double shifts to cover the deficits, and we need that to stop so we can see the true staffing issues.
MPs in WA's north are expressing concerns as crime continues to plague regional communities. There are also allegations that family members of police officers are threatened by criminals. Liberal MLC for the Mining and Pastoral Region, Neil Thompson, questioned the McGowan government's crime prevention strategy as summer approaches. The police minister responded by saying the government is always ready to provide more resources if it's requested by the police commissioner.
And what is the government going to do over the next few months when we're going to see this massive spike, as we do every summer? What is the government going to do to ensure we don't see this state of anarchy lead to something even worse going forward?
Shocking in the event that any police officers, and particularly their families, are ever threatened. Sadly, it is something that does happen around the state, because the nature of policing is police confront some bad people who do on occasion make threats. I condemn that, and as I say, I always support police and advocate for them whenever I can and wherever is necessary.
A historic moment is approaching Western Australia, with the Hellenic Presidential Guard's elite unit visiting Perth in November to remember Greece's National No Day. 10 members from the unit will be visiting Perth from the 1st to 7th of November, and WA Premier Mark McGowan and Perth Lord Mayor Basil Zempilas will be welcoming them in person. The Guards will also visit several WA-based Greek community organisations and schools during their trip. A flag-raising ceremony will be held on the march by the elite unit on St George's Terrace on the 4th of November, and a wreath-laying ceremony at Kings Park on the 6th. The Greek consul in Perth, Georgia Karasoto, believes Western Australians should enjoy the rare opportunity to witness the Evzoni's visit.
Award-winning fivefold mental health advocate Nigel Gold becomes the finalist for the mining industry's prestigious 2022 Prospect Awards. Mr. Gold has been shortlisted as one of the finalists for the Safety Advocate for the Year, according to the event's organisers' confirmation email. Mr. Gold is currently working as a fly-in, fly-out worker at Rio Tinto, at the same time promoting the importance of mental health amongst mining workers. He entered the Archibald Prize back in 2021 with an oil painting illustrating mental well-being and a vital support message for the Royal Flying Doctor Service. He was also awarded the Delegate of the Year by the Australian Workers' Union in August, with the support of Prime Minister Anthony Albanese.
We've got to step up to the plate and say, hey, we've got mental health issues we've got that can be fixed if we talk about it. And people have to stand up, do the right thing. Okay, Movember, Royal Flying Doctor Service. This can say, hey, we can do it, and the industry will come of age finally.
So Ivan, speaking of Movember, do you think you'll grow a moustache?
You know, I actually tried doing that. Tried grow a mo for 2.5 weeks during this program's break in Christmas and in the New Year. 2.5 weeks I didn't shave. The problem is that it hasn't grown too much. So I think the answer is no. But I enjoy looking younger though.
That's an advantage. That is true.
And we'll recap this week's top stories again in just a moment.
Right now, here's Madeline Lombardi with Western Perspective.
Thanks, Ivan and Melly. Welcome to Western Perspective. I'm Madeline Lombardi. There are tough times ahead for many West Australians as we are set to bear the burden of the eastern states' 50% electricity price hike. Despite the fact that our utility grids are not linked with other states, additional costs will be added to manufactured goods imported from interstate, forcing WA consumers to pay more before the grim warning of double-digit inflation. Here is veteran political journalist and analyst Peter Kennedy with his observation.
When Jim Chalmers announced the projected energy price increases for the East Coast on Tuesday night, the feeling was, well, bad luck for East Coast consumers, bad luck for East Coast households, and that Western Australians wouldn't be affected by that because of the smart decisions by previous state governments. But the sad reality is that because most of the manufactured goods that we use in the West are imported from the East, and the effect of those power prices will be will be felt on the price of those manufactured goods that come from the east. West Australians are going to be paying those higher prices just as the same as those on the east coast. We're not immune. We're not immune from the bungled decisions that governments in the east have made over the past few years. Selling off power stations, restricting coal production, restricting gas production, and not having a gas reservation policy in the east. So their bungles will be not confined to the east coast. West Australians will have to pay for them. Jim Chalmers in his budget predicted that inflation would hit the sevens, and he believed that that would be the peak and that inflation would start to come down. However, the impact of these increased power prices is going to have another impact on inflation as well. Let's hope his prediction on inflation is correct, but there's also the possibility that the inflation figures could have been very modest. And don't rule out the possibility that the inflation rate could hit somewhere close to 10% over the next couple of years. Something Australia hasn't seen for a very long time, but given the circumstances, given the high power prices and the problems particularly in the east, the supply lines particularly in the east, 10% could be a real possibility. It's going to be a tough couple of years. Inflation heading up, real wages not matching inflation, and households are going to do it tough. So, and it's not just on the east coast. The west coast, the state government has helped cushion the impact of inflation and higher power prices on West Australians. I suppose the question is, how long can they continue to do that? But the real point, West Australians are not immune from these very high power price increases that have been forecast for the east.
And now, here is AMA WA spokesman Dr. Andrew Miller with his weekly COVID-19 update and medical commentary.
Hi, I'm just back from New Zealand after a couple of weeks of enjoying being over there. Very interesting travelling for the first time overseas since 2019. And the thing that dismays me is that most people have given up on trying to prevent themselves from getting infected when they travel and just accepting infection. And we know that with every infection, whether you're vaccinated or not, there is a risk of getting severe complications and long-term COVID. Now, it may not happen the first time or the second time or the third time you get infected, but people seem to be resigning themselves to being infected a couple of times a year for the next decade, and that is just not an acceptable way to look after your long-term health, and we would not recommend that any more than we would smoking. So when I get on a plane and I'm one in 100 people wearing a proper mask to get on the plane, I don't see why people just can't take these simple protections to look after themselves at this stage. And it's a failure of government messaging. It's a failure of political messaging where they've been saying that this is all over, we've solved the problem. And unfortunately, the people who are going to be doing the suffering are the ones who are buying that hook, line and sinker at the moment, it seems. So I was able to travel for 2 weeks and really enjoy myself. I went to the meetings that I needed to go to and wore a mask when I was in crowded indoor locations. I still went to restaurants and chose well-ventilated ones or chose to sit outside where that wasn't possible, and enjoyed a lot of what New Zealand has to offer, which is obviously also in the outdoors. And because of that, masking and being a bit careful, particularly when there are people around who were all crowded into closed spaces, I managed to avoid catching anything the whole time I was away, despite there still being pretty high rates of these Omicron derivative viruses circulating through the population at the moment. So it is swimming a little bit against the tide at the moment to look after yourself, but my message is you don't have to miss out on things. You don't have to miss out on catching up on people, on having conversations, on having a coffee with them, on having a meal with them face to face, and that those human connections really are important, and it really is a good thing to rekindle them for those people who have been avoiding it all. But it's possible to do it in a safe way and a sensible way, and we should be supporting particularly our elderly, particularly our very young who are not vaccinated. But this disease can strike at anybody. So for those of you who have been looking after yourselves, good on you. Remain vigilant. For those who've got a bit slack lately, it's not that hard to pull the mask on when you're getting on a bus and take it off again as soon as you step out. And it may be you that has an asymptomatic infection one day and everybody else around you that you're protecting by not spreading that unnecessarily. So the message that the government should be getting out there, they're not. Well, we'll try and keep plugging away at that. Thanks very much for your time.
That was Dr. Andrew Miller. And now a brief weather update. Cold temperatures are set to make WA shiver with a minimum of 8 degrees on Monday and Tuesday night. On Thursday, we'll hit a maximum of 31 degrees at daytime, drop to 13 at night before we'll hit a maximum of 26 degrees on Friday with a nighttime low of 15 degrees, plus a 30% chance of rain. The advice from me is don't pack away your jackets just yet. And that's Western Perspective this week. We'll be back again next Sunday. Until then, Ivan and Melly, it's back to you.
That's some good advice. Thanks, Maddie. And right now, here's Leo with what's coming up on 6 News tonight.
Thanks, guys. Making news on 6 News. More rallies set to be held to honour 15-year-old Cassius Turvey after his alleged murder while walking home from school with a group of friends in Perth. D-Day for one minor party in Victoria as another has to resort to endorsing independent candidates. And it's Halloween tomorrow, but what about all those ghosts from back in May? Questions put to an our Liberal candidate about what he might know about the other Kooyong Independent. You can see full details on those stories and plenty more by heading to our YouTube channel. Search 6 News AU to find us or head to our website, 6newsau.com. For now, the guys, it's back to you.
Thanks, Leo. And that's our weekly news and current affairs, with the latest news on our website, wamnnews.com.au.
Don't forget to subscribe to the WAMN Extra News Club so we can continue our work in the community. Full details on wamnews.com.au/news/extra. From Melly and myself, we wish you good health, good night. See you next Sunday.
Thanks for watching.